delighted today to be joined by Cisco's Cybersecurity Director, Terry Greer-King, who's going to talk to us about what GDPR is and help people put themselves on the front foot when it comes to preparing for it. So GDPR, companies have to adhere to it. What are the penalties for non-compliance?
Scary. So we talk about going up to 4% of global turnover. There are stages of this. So the first stage might be written warnings. Sounds like a note from the school teacher, right? So it could be written warnings, but it can go all the way up to 4% of global turnover or 20 million euros, whichever's the highest. Now, those are quite big sums. There was widely reported example of a UK bank breach recently, and the amount stolen is reputed to be £2.5 million, which is a significant amount of money. But someone had worked out that GDPR was in place now. Potentially the fine to that bank would have been £197 million. Right. That's significant.
So it's pretty hefty consequences there. Now you mentioned earlier about the fact that GDPR gives more rights to people over their personal data. What do we mean by personal data? What does that entail?
So I think most people identify with personal data. Your account records, your bank account, passwords, possibly your email address. The really sensitive ones, health records, medical records, yeah, we would think about that. But actually it specifically mentions things like your IP address. Right. Now we wouldn't necessarily connect our IP address as being personal data, but in effect it is, because it's a personal identifier. Now if you think of organisations using or collecting or working with people's IP addresses, that really kind of expands the thinking about what this actually covers. It's quite a lot.
Now in terms of meeting the criteria for GDPR, does that mean that companies need to go out and buy a load of new security technology?
Well, in some ways it'd be nice if they did, but I think more importantly it's about attitude, it's about process and risk. And I think traditionally we've thought about cybersecurity as being a technology problem with a technology answer. And so organisations have kind of invested in lots of technology to stop bad things happening, which is great. The bad guys have got cleverer. And so ostensibly, technology plays a big part in it, but it's much more to do with attitude and process. So much so that GDPR actually specifies that organisations will appoint a data protection officer. That's distinct from a risk officer, distinct from most other functions that currently exist. And the data protection officers are laid down and quite specific about what they're supposed to do. But most importantly is they're supposed to be outside of IT and outside of the main business, so they're not answerable to anybody else. Literally, they're answering to the regulation. So I think that attitude within organisations, that cybersecurity, protecting employees, protecting citizens data is not just technology, it's much more about attitude and working out what data we are actually transporting and taking it quite seriously.
What would be your advice to companies who are looking at their processes and knowing that they need to improve them to meet the criteria? How would you advise they look at the way that they do stuff?
Simplistically, the way to start with all these things is gap analysis. If you have the expertise, start to use it. If you don't, try to contract it in. Work out what you're supposed to do on the 25th of May 2018. There are some very specific guidelines about what that should be. And I think if you compare that with current process and structure and what you do at the moment, you kind of get a gap. So I think that between now and 25th of May 2018, you can kind of get a roadmap of things you could do to get there. So I think it's all about that. The later you leave it, the more it's going to be a panic situation. The earlier we do it, the sooner we can start on that journey.
So better conversations, people being more aware of the precious things that they hold within their business and when it comes to data, so that's great. Lovely, thank you very much for your time, Terry. Really appreciate it. There's much more information about GDPR on our website, and if you'd like to know more, want to have a conversation, then please do get in touch with us. But yeah, thank you very much. Bye for now.